I was sitting in my car, surrounded by sand and soldiers, when I received the news that my divorce was finalized. It was a very difficult period in my life, and I did not understand at all what to do next. We had been married for nearly 4 years, but for about 1.5 years of that time, I was stationed in a hot, arid country halfway around the world. She couldn't handle it anymore, and I completely understood. I didn't even try to change her mind. Being a military spouse is one of the toughest jobs in the world, second only to being a parent. My hometown is Ponca City, Oklahoma. That's where I grew up, met and married Lisa Thompson. We were each other's first love. She was the only girl I ever dated, both in high school and community college. After community college, I enlisted in the Army while she pursued a nursing degree. We got married after she graduated, and I was stationed at Fort Belvoir, Virginia. We had been there for a little over a year when I received orders to go overseas. Lisa decided to move back to Ponca City instead of staying at Belvoir, and quickly began working at the local hospital. When my tour ended, I returned to Belvoir, and Lisa joined me. We had a wonderful 13 months together before I received orders for another overseas deployment. Once again, Lisa returned to Ponca City. Neither of us was happy about the second separation, but we both knew it was part of Army life. I had been deployed for about 6 months when I got a letter from Lisa saying she couldn't handle the separation any longer. She wrote, "I married you to be with you every day and night. We've been married for nearly 4 years, and you've spent over 1/4 of that time on the other side of the world. I can't live like this. Please understand that I love you, but this loneliness is driving me crazy. I've included the divorce papers. If you love me and care about my happiness, please sign them." In response, I wrote her a lengthy letter, expressing my sadness that she felt this way, but also saying that I completely understood. I told her that I wanted her to be happy, and if divorcing me would achieve that, then I'd accept it. I signed the papers and told her I loved her. A few months after receiving the divorce notice, I returned to the States and was stationed in Washington, D.C. at the Pentagon, which was practically next to Fort Belvoir. She was still in Ponca City, and I assumed she was still working at the hospital. I was tempted to call her, but decided against it, thinking, why reopen old wounds? Before joining the Army, I had earned an associate's degree, and thanks to a lot of hard work, correspondence courses, and on-post classes through the University of Maryland, I completed my degree. It was a Monday morning, and I had just arrived at my office in the Pentagon, sipping my first cup of coffee and reviewing my schedule for the day. At 8:45, I got the call. My father had suffered a massive heart attack and passed away. By the afternoon, I was on a flight home. Since Ponca City doesn't have commercial flights, I flew into Oklahoma City, OKC, and rented a car. When I arrived home, my brother Matt, a police officer, my sister Tina, a teacher like our mom, and their spouses were with my mother. I immediately went to my mom, who was sitting on the couch between Matt and Tina. When she saw me, we both started crying. Matt stood up to let me sit down and hug her. After we had both calmed down, she told me that the heart attack happened while Dad was in the garage, cleaning his prized possession, a 1957 Chevy Bel Air convertible. He died in that car, and he wouldn't have wanted it any other way, she said with a hint of a smile. The next couple of days were spent finalizing all the arrangements. Since Dad was a veteran, the Army handled a lot of the responsibilities, easing the load on Mom. As for us 3 children, we didn't make any decisions. She and Dad had already discussed their wishes, and she was simply following through on what they had agreed. The only thing she asked of me was to wear my dress uniform for the funeral. It was still hanging in the closet of my old bedroom. I hadn't needed it during my time overseas or in Washington so far. It just needed cleaning, and I had to add my ribbons and badges. The morning of the funeral, Mom looked at me, came over and brushed off some invisible lint from my chest. Then she paused, looked up, and kissed me. "Your father was proud of you," she said. Later that day, Matt and I stood by the coffin, greeting people as they passed. Not long after, my ex-wife Lisa appeared. I extended my hand for a handshake, but she ignored it and hugged me instead. "I'm sorry, Michael," she said. "I was always Michael to everyone, never Mike." "I loved your father." "Thank you. I did too." It seemed like she wanted to say more, but chose not to. By the end of the day, the family was gathered at Mom's house, eating some of the enormous amounts of food that friends had brought over. Mom had been incredibly strong throughout the whole ordeal. The sun was just setting when the phone rang. Mom and Dad still had a landline, and Tina picked it up. "Hello?" Pause. "Hold on, Michael, it's for you." I took the phone from her and she raised her eyebrows as she looked at me. "Hello?" I said. "Hello, Michael." "Hello, Lisa?" That caught the room's attention. "Can we talk?" "I don't think there's much left to discuss. You made your choice, and it's probably for the best for both of us." "I'm not so sure about that anymore." "Well, it's in the past now. I've got an early flight tomorrow and I'm heading to OKC, Oklahoma City, soon to spend the night there, so I have to go." "Where are you stationed?" she asked before I could hang up. "Listen, Lisa, I don't have a lot of time with my family. Thanks for coming today. Goodbye." I hung up and turned around to find everyone looking at me. "We're divorced. It's over. I'm fine. She's fine," I told them. "Now I need to change and pack. I'll be leaving shortly." A little later I had my bag packed and was ready to go. After hugs, kisses, and handshakes, I finally made it out to my rental car. The next day I was back in Washington. One of the good things I took from Lisa was an appreciation for classical music, particularly Beethoven and Bach. Brahms, the third of the three Bs, never really did it for me. 2 weeks after returning to Washington, the National Symphony Orchestra performed a program featuring several of Beethoven's works. Among the pieces were the Bagatelle and his Symphony No. 7, Op. 92.5. It was a diverse lineup that also included compositions by Copland and Bernstein. Tickets were hard to come by, but the Military District of Washington often secured tickets to major local events. I went to the Recreational Services office and managed to get one. On the night of the concert, I made my way to the Kennedy Center, a venue I had visited before and really enjoyed. The first half of the concert was dedicated entirely to Beethoven. During intermission, I grabbed a drink and returned to my seat. As other audience members began to settle back in, a couple was making their way down my row to seats on my right. The woman was in front of the man. I stood up to give them more room to pass, but as the woman stepped in front of me, she accidentally stepped on my foot. High heels, especially stilettos, can cause a lot of pain when they land on the top of your foot. I let out a loud yelp, which caused her to lose her balance and fall into me, knocking me back into my seat. Off balance, she ended up falling into my lap. Somehow, I managed not to spill my drink. We sat and just looked at each other. I enjoyed the scent of her Taboo perfume, the same ones my ex-wife used, and they always made an impression on me. "How's your leg?" she finally asked, and her voice was beautiful. "It's not that bad," I replied. We sat there for a few moments just staring at each other until she broke the silence. "You know, we really need to stop meeting like this," she said. "Why?" I asked. "Are you a perv RT?" she inquired. "Pretty much," I replied. I like some perverts, she said with a grin. Just then we heard someone clearing their throat. We turned to see her escort standing nearby. She gave me one last look, smiled, and stood up. Then she made her way down the row to her seat. At the end of the concert, we were all heading out. I ended up walking behind her. I looked around for her companion but didn't see him. I tapped her on the shoulder. She turned and recognized me. Taboo? I asked. Yes. How did you guess? It's my favorite. Mine too. Where's your friend? He's somewhere behind us in the crowd. Your husband? God, no. Serious relationship? No. In that case, do you give out your number? Rarely. I'm a pretty rare kind of guy. She laughed. What you are is a perv RT. You said so yourself. And you said you liked perv RTs. I said I liked some perver arts. The people around us were showing interest in our discussion. Some were chuckling, while others were shaking their heads in disapproval. We had made our way through the lobby to the front door when she paused. I should wait for my friend. Do you want some company? For what? 30 seconds? He can't be too far behind. She laughed. In that case, I suppose I'll take my leave. It was a pleasure to be stepped on by you. She laughed again. And it was a pleasure to sit in your lap. I chuckled and waved as I exited through one of the many doors. I turned back to see her waving at me. It had been nearly a month since I attended the Beethoven concert, and I was eager for another one. It didn't necessarily have to be Beethoven. I'd be happy with just about any classical music concert. I checked the Kennedy Center schedule and found that a concert featuring Maurice Ravel's music was set for the following week. I visited the recreational services offices to inquire about a ticket. There was only one remaining, so I took it. When she handed me the ticket, she mentioned, "We were only able to secure 2 of these tickets. The seats are together, so you'll be sitting next to a colonel's wife." At that time, I was a staff sergeant. Enlisted personnel and officers, including their spouses, rarely mingled. In my role, I interacted with 2 colonels and various lieutenant colonels and majors. In the Pentagon, it was even less common to see captains and lieutenants than staff sergeants. I had never met a colonel's wife before, but it didn't concern me because I was excited to enjoy the music. The night of the concert arrived, and I chose one of my 2 suits before heading out. I arrived early and was reading the program when I caught a familiar scent. Taboo. I looked up, and there she was. I stood up to greet her. I thought you mentioned you weren't married. I'm not. I heard that a colonel's wife would be sitting next to me. My mother is married to a colonel. She took a seat and clarified that her mother had gotten the ticket but couldn't attend. By the way, I'm Connie. Connie Self. She extended her hand. I shook it. Michael Carter. Nice to meet you, Mike. Do you enjoy Ravel? Mike. No one had ever called me that before, but I didn't correct her because the way she said it made it sound like, I want you to make love to me. I do, especially Gaspard de la Nuit. We chatted until the program began. During intermission, we grabbed a drink in the lobby and continued our conversation. The program concluded with Bolero, a piece some consider to be the most tedious music ever composed, while others view it as incredibly sensual. I find myself in the latter group. As it played, I stole glances at Connie Self and noticed a couple of times that she was looking back at me. When it was over, I concluded that if it had stirred her sensually, she certainly masked it well. I escorted her to her car. She unlocked the door, and I opened it for her. Just as she was about to get in, she turned to me. Aren't you going to ask for my number? I stared at her. I had asked for it when we first met, but that was before I realized she was a colonel's daughter. Look, I said, I'm a staff sergeant, and you're the daughter of a colonel. I doubt your father would approve of you getting involved with someone like me. Who said anything about getting involved? Friendship isn't dictated by rank. I didn't mean it that way. How did you mean it? It's just that, She smiled at my awkwardness, got into her car, and drove away. Maybe I just completely messed things up, I thought to myself about Staff Sergeant Michael Carter. 3 days later, I picked up the office phone. Special Operations, Sergeant Carter. How can I assist you? You can assist me by jotting down 10 numbers, replied the sultriest voice I had ever encountered, and I could almost sense the taboo fragrance she was wearing. I'm sorry, what did you say? You heard me. Now write them down. As she recited the numbers, I diligently noted them. Now repeat them back to me, she instructed. I complied. Good boy. Do you know what to do with them now? I think I'm starting to get the picture. Another good boy for you. Keep it up and you might earn a gold star. Yes, ma'am. Don't take too long. She ended the call. My first thought was how she had obtained my number, but then I remembered that her father, like the 30,000 others working at the Pentagon, had access to the Pentagon phone book. Later that evening, I tried using the numbers, but there was no answer, so I left a voicemail. The following evening, she called me. You didn't waste any time, she said. You told me not to take too long. She chuckled. We chatted again the next night, and the night after that. However, one night stood out. Aren't you ever going to ask me out? She inquired. Ask you out for what? For a date. I'd love to, but no buts. It's either yes or no. What's it going to be? I want to. Then just do it. All right, would you like to have dinner with me? Sure. When? Tomorrow night? Sounds good. What time? 7. 7 it is. She then provided me with her address. She lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. As she showed me around, she seemed especially proud of her shoe collection. The closet in the guest bedroom had very few clothes, while the rest was filled with shelves. Those shelves were stacked with shoes, hundreds of them, and she took great delight in showcasing them to me. I was relieved she didn't live with her parents, as I was unsure how they would feel about her dating someone in the military. We dated for 2 months before we became intimate. In fact, it was the same night I met her parents. She had invited me to dinner with them and sensed my hesitation. Oh, come on, Mike. They're not going to bite. They're just normal parents. They'll be curious since I've never brought anyone home before. Do they know I'm in the military? Can you stop with that? I apologize. It's just... Say one more thing about your rank, and I swear I'll be really upset, so just drop it. Dinner went unexpectedly smoothly. I found Colonel Jacob Self and his wife Marion very pleasant, and they seemed to feel the same way about me. That evening, when Connie and I were about to leave, her father walked us to the door. His parting words, which I believed, were, "It was nice to meet you. We hope to see you again soon." That night we made love in her apartment. 14 months later, we tied the knot. Another 14 months passed, and newly promoted Brigadier General Jacob and Mrs. Marion Self welcomed their first grandchild, a girl named Ruth, who was born in Virginia, while I was still stationed at the Pentagon. Soon after, we had another granddaughter, Carrie, born in Germany, followed by a grandson named Jacob, after his father, who arrived while we were stationed at Fort Lewis, Washington. We affectionately called them Big Jake and Little Jake. Life was good. Big Jake and Marion retired and relocated to Florida, while Connie and I found ourselves back at the Pentagon. One day, Connie, our kids, and I were visiting her parents in Florida. Connie and her mother took Ruth and Carrie shopping, while Big Jake and Little Jake played in the backyard, and I watched them with a smile. My phone rang, delivering the news of an accident. An elderly couple in their new motorhome had crossed the median and collided head-on with Connie's car. It seems the old man had a heart attack while driving, resulting in his death, while his wife, who was in the back of the motorhome, survived with numerous bumps and bruises after being violently thrown around. The three of us hurried to the hospital only to learn that both Connie and Marion had died at the scene. Ruth and Carrie were injured but would survive. We were still at the hospital when we laid Connie and Marion to rest. They were buried next to each other. The following 2 months were the toughest of my life. Both of my daughters spent nearly 3 weeks in the hospital, and Big Jake and I practically lived there. I was overwhelmed with grief, but life had to continue. When the girls were discharged, we returned home, but it didn't feel like home. It was the first time we had been back since our trip to Florida, and the 4 of us had to mourn all over again. Everywhere we turned, we were reminded of Connie, the clean clothes in the basket that she hadn't folded, her robe draped across the bed, and her clothes hanging in the closet. Being in that house filled with her memory felt almost like losing her a second time. We all cried for days, but it was especially hard for Ruth and Carrie. They didn't get the chance to say goodbye to their mother or grandmother because they were in the hospital and couldn't attend the funerals. It was tough, but I managed to get up every morning, wake the kids for school, and go to work. It took a long time for me to feel productive again. The kids missed their mother just as much as I did, and I quickly realized how incredibly challenging it was to be a single parent to 3 young children. 3 years after Connie's passing, I retired from the Army. We moved back to Oklahoma and bought a nice house not far from my mother. My brother and sister lived nearby as well, and my children seemed to enjoy spending time with their cousins, the kids of my siblings. Connie had been an only child. After taking some time to settle in, I began to feel restless and applied for a job as a substitute teacher at one of our 2 high schools. If things went well, I would be offered a full-time position the following school year. Life was moving along, but I still missed Connie, and the kids did too. One Saturday evening, Ruth began to complain about a pain in her side, and it seemed to worsen, so I quickly took her to the hospital. My sister Tina came over to take care of little Jake and Carrie. Once at the hospital, they rushed her into surgery and removed her appendix. I planned to stay the night with her. While she slept, I dozed off in the chair beside her bed. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up and was sitting in the chair when I noticed the door slowly open, and light from the hallway began to illuminate the room. It had been a long time, but I still recognized her. She remained a very attractive woman. "Hello, Lisa," I said. She paused for a moment before realizing who I was. "Oh my God. I had no idea you were here." "Well, I am. Please come in." I stood up as she approached the bed. "How is she?" she inquired. "You probably know more about that than I do." "You're right. Her chart indicates she's doing well." "Good." "I saw her last name on the admissions list. There aren't many Carters around here, so I thought she might be related to either Matt or Tina." "No, she's mine." "Where's her mother?" "She passed away over 3 years ago." "Oh, Michael, I'm so sorry." "Yeah, me too." "Are you living back here now?" "Yes, for the past few months." We stood there in silence for a moment. Finally, I broke it. "Well, I should probably try to get some sleep." "Of course." And then she left. I woke up around 5, and there was a blanket over me. I spent most of the next 3 days with Ruth. Lisa dropped by several times. She and Ruth chatted about boys and how they might react to the scar when she wore a swimsuit. "It's a really small scar," Lisa reassured her. "And besides, when they see how gorgeous you are, they won't even notice." Ruth beamed with happiness. The first Saturday after Ruth was discharged, my phone rang. I checked the number, but I didn't recognize it, so I didn't pick up. The caller left a voicemail, though. "Hi, this is Lisa. I hope Ruth is still doing well. Time spent in the hospital always seems harder on kids." There was a brief pause. "Can I talk to you, please? There are so many things I've wanted to tell you over the years, but never had the chance. Please, Michael?" I listened to that message at least 5 times before I called her back. "Hello," she answered. "Hi, it's Michael." "Hi. You wanted to talk?" "Not over the phone. In person." "Okay. My mom is taking the kids to the lake tomorrow. Why don't you come by my place around 10:30 in the morning? Or do you have work?" "No, tomorrow works. Where do you live?" I gave her the address. "Do you still drink coffee?" "I do, but now it's decaf." "Same here." She arrived exactly at 10:30, though I wasn't surprised. She had always been punctual. The coffee was already on the table when I opened the door for her. I sensed she might want to hug me, but she seemed to change her mind. I pointed out where she should sit. She sat down, took a sip of coffee, and began. "It was 9 months into your first tour overseas. I had an affair. I had been without you for so long and was eagerly waiting for your return. Sammy Young saw me at the mall and struck up a conversation. Do you remember him?" I shook my head. "He was 2 years ahead of us in school." That conversation led to more, one after another. Eventually, we moved on to drinks and dinner. After almost 2 months, I slept with him. Just once. She took another sip of her coffee. "When you came back home, I was terrified you'd figure it out. But you were so happy to see me that the thought of me being unfaithful never even crossed your mind. You might remember, we had a great year together." I nodded in agreement. "Then you had to go overseas again, and I returned here. You'd only been gone a couple of weeks when he showed up again. I have no idea how he even knew I was back in Ponca. The thought of being apart from you for another year was unbearable. Less than a month after you left, I slept with him again, and it continued for 2 more months. Then I found out I was pregnant. That's when I asked you for a divorce. I told him, and he disappeared. I've seen him around town a few times since, but we never talk. After I filed for divorce, I lost the baby. I almost called off the divorce, but felt so guilty that I didn't. I tried to confess everything to you when you came home for your father's funeral, but you wouldn't listen. Cheating on you is the worst thing I've ever done, and I've regretted it every single day. It was selfish and greedy, and I have no excuse. I loved you when we were young. I loved you when we got married. And I loved you when we divorced. All these years I've kept my distance from your family because of my shame. We've bumped into each other a few times, but that's been it. 2 years after our divorce, I met a man at the hospital while his mother was having surgery. We hit it off, and a year later we were married. 3 years after that, we divorced. Since then, I've focused on my job. Then I saw Ruth's name at the hospital. As I said, I had been avoiding your family, but I thought if she needed anything, I could help her. I walked into her room, and there you were. I rarely get surprised, and I'm never shocked, but seeing you stunned me. I had no idea how to react or what to say. When I left her room, I broke down in the hallway. I cried for 2 hours. I cried with joy that you were alive and well. Then I cried over the stupid mistake I made and for the love I had lost. I took a sip of my coffee, which by then was too cold to drink, just like hers, I imagined. I sat there looking at her, struggling to find the right words. I had no idea she had cheated on me, let alone that she got pregnant by someone else while we were still married. Finally, I spoke. I don't know what to say. I always thought the reason you divorced me was because you couldn't handle being apart from me. But now you're telling me that loneliness wasn't the issue at all. It was your physical desires. I could understand the loneliness. I loved you enough to let you go because I couldn't bear the thought of you being lonely. That's why I agreed to the divorce. But the cheating? Even after all these years, that's a tough pill to swallow. The idea of you sleeping with another man while married to me is something I'm really struggling with. I loved you enough to let you go, and while I was grieving over losing you, you were carrying another man's child. I stood up, took her cup, and walked toward the kitchen. I think you should leave, I said as I went. Michael, please. Goodbye. She slowly stood, walked to the door, paused, and turned toward me. Michael, Goodbye. Why in the world did she feel the need to tell me that? Should it even matter after all these years? And why is it affecting me so much? At first I was upset, angry even. I simmered over it for 2 weeks, replaying what she'd told me. Then, reason started to kick in. Why should it matter anymore? We've been divorced for years, and I have no feelings for her anymore. The end of the school year was approaching, and I was busy, so Lisa faded into the background. Big Jake asked if the kids could visit him for part of the summer, and I told him of course they could. 3 days after graduation, he flew in. We met him at the Oklahoma City airport, and the children returned with him. Their stay was scheduled for 2 weeks, and Big Jake thought that was all he could do. Since Connie died, my social life has shortened, and 3 years is quite a long time. I've had a few women, but I still feel Connie's absence. My brother and sister tried to set me up with some woman, but nothing came of it. There was simply no spark or connection between us. Of course, I had fun with a couple of them, but it was just for physical relaxation. My brother was the deputy chief of police at that time. One day he stopped by my house right after I finished mowing the lawn. I was relaxing on the front porch with a glass of iced tea. He went inside, poured himself a drink, and joined me outside. We talked for a few minutes until the real reason for his visit became apparent. I probably shouldn't be sharing this, but since it's public record, I guess it's all right. We've arrested Lisa 3 times recently for public intoxication. Each time, when my officers attempted to take her in, she would swat at them and insist that they keep their hands off her because she belonged to Michael Carter. The first time she said that, the officer thought it was amusing and told me. She repeated it during the other 2 arrests as well. Her father posted her bail, and the district attorney decided not to pursue charges. When it happened again last week, she opted to enter an alcohol rehab program in Tulsa. She's there now. I shook my head. Why are you sharing this with me? Her father seems to think it's connected to you. He had no clue you were back in town until Lisa got drunk and mentioned seeing you and your daughter. When she sobered up, he asked her about it, but she wouldn't talk. The last time he recalls seeing her drink was during your divorce. He told me she usually doesn't drink much at all. I remembered that we used to drink occasionally, but not often. I'm asking the same thing. Why are you telling me this? To be honest, I'm not sure. It just feels like she's reaching out for help, and you're the one she's turning to. I took a deep breath and recounted our last conversation. "Oh my God," he exclaimed. "Do her parents know?" "I have no idea, but if she hasn't told them, I'm definitely not going to." We continued talking until his radio started calling him, and he had to go. For the next 3 days, my thoughts were consumed by Lisa and the impact she had on our marriage. I was caught in a conflict between loneliness and desire, love and lust. The more I pondered, the angrier I became. I didn't owe her anything, so why was I dedicating so much time to thinking about her? I had no answer, but the following day I reached out to Lisa's father to see if I could meet with him and his wife. When I arrived, we shook hands, and Lisa's mother offered me some iced tea. Nobody turns down iced tea during an Oklahoma summer. It had been years since I was last in that house, but everything looked the same. "What can we do for you, Michael?" he asked. "I'm not really sure," I replied. "I heard Lisa has been arrested and is in rehab, and I was wondering if there's anything I could do." "Honestly, we have no idea," her father responded. "Everything was fine until she got arrested the first time, and that's when we learned you were back. We're at a loss, Michael. She seems to be in a lot of pain but won't open up about it. We're getting older, Michael, and we want to figure out how we can help her, but we just don't know how," her mother said, gripping her husband's hand tightly. "Would it be beneficial if I visited her?" I inquired. "We've discussed that, and we're uncertain whether it would help or make things worse. But I suppose it's worth a shot," her father replied. The following day I drove to Tulsa. I checked in at the front desk and was guided to her room. She was sitting in a chair, gazing out at the gardens. When she heard the door open, she turned to see who had arrived, her eyes widening in surprise when she recognized me. "Hi, Michael. I didn't expect to see you again." "Why not?" "I thought you might hate me after our last conversation when you asked me to leave your house." "I don't hate you, Lisa. I've never felt that way. But I do hate what you did." She rose, approached me, and looked me straight in the eyes. "I feel the same way, Michael. I loathe it with every part of me. But I can't change the past. I've been living with guilt and self-loathing all these years. There have only been a handful of days when it hasn't crossed my mind. Those days have been rare, but they were a true blessing." She turned and sat on the edge of her bed, pausing with a distant look in her eyes before asking, "What brings you here?" "I'm not entirely sure. I spoke with your parents and—" She interrupted me, standing up in shock. "Oh my God, Michael. You didn't tell them, did you?" "That would break them." "No. I didn't say anything to them." I settled on the windowsill and looked at her. "It's your choice if you ever want to. I will never tell them. Never. They would be devastated." She sat back down on her bed. "That's for you to decide." There was a moment of silence, and I noticed tears welling up in her eyes. "Are you all right?" "I'm not sure. I thought I was fine, but now I'm not so certain. After I last saw you, I started drinking. I thought drowning myself in alcohol would make the memories fade, but it only made them stronger. It brought back every single detail." She paused. "Do you remember what you wrote in your letter when you returned the divorce papers?" "I remember most of it. I recall every single word. I still have it, and I've read it at least 1,000 times. You told me you would grant me the divorce if it made me happy. That was all you wanted in life, and knowing I was lonely pained you. You said that if the divorce would bring me joy, you would gladly sign the papers. I have loved you since the moment I met you, you wrote. Signing these papers is one of the easiest things I've ever done because it will make you happy. And you signed it. I cried when I first read it, and I cry every time I read it now." She turned away, tears streaming down her face. The room fell silent for a long while. I remained on the windowsill, watching her, feeling powerless to help. I felt a little teary myself. I stayed with her until it was time for her to go to dinner. She didn't want to leave, but they insisted she had to. She seemed like she wanted to hug me, yet, like before, she hesitated to make contact. After I left, I drove straight to her parents' house. "Why is she there?" I asked. "We're not entirely sure. It was her decision. She mentioned needing to stop drinking, and they offered to help her." "Has she ever struggled with alcohol before?" "Not at all." "What do you think triggered it?" "We thought you might have an idea, as we don't know." "I'm no specialist, but I believe she's trying to escape from something." "She should come home." "I don't think they can truly assist her there," I suggested. "I agree," her father replied. "I'm not so certain," her mother said. "With your permission, I'd like to visit her again tomorrow." "Of course," they replied in unison. I arrived bright and early the following morning. She was in the cafeteria having breakfast, and her eyes lit up when she spotted me. "You came back," she exclaimed with a big smile. "I did." "Would you like some coffee?" "Yes, but not here." "Where then?" "At your parents' house. How about we have lunch with them?" "Are you serious?" "Absolutely. What do you need to do to check out of here?" "I'm not sure. Do you want to stay?" "Not if you want me to leave." "Then let's go." We entered her room, gathered her belongings, and made our way to the reception desk. "I'm going home," Lisa declared as we stepped outside. Once she settled into my car, she called her parents. "Hi, Mom. I'm on my way home." There was a pause. "Michael's bringing me." Another pause. "We'll be there soon. Love you. Bye." The remainder of the journey was silent. Neither of us spoke, yet I could sense her gaze on me throughout the drive, as if she were trying to memorize every detail in case I disappeared. It reminded me of the previous day when she had kept her eyes on me for most of the time we were together. When we arrived, her parents were waiting by the front door. Lisa jumped out and embraced them as if she hadn't seen them in ages. "Why? How?" her parents managed to say, bewildered. "Michael wanted to have lunch with you, so we came home." "When are you going back?" her mother inquired. Lisa turned to me. I shrugged. She faced her mother. "Never. I don't need them." We had lunch together, followed by dinner. By the time I left for home, it was nearly midnight, and she walked me to my car. "Thank you, Michael." "You're welcome." "Will I see you again?" "I'm not sure." I think I can accept that now because for years I believed you hated me. You said you didn't, but I never believed you. However, after the past 2 days, I truly feel that you don't. Now I just need to learn to stop hating myself. With that, she turned and walked back into the house. What should I do now, I thought as I drove home. I had to admit that spending the day with her brought back some fond memories. However, every time I looked at her, I was reminded of her round belly, which carried another man's child. I wasn't sure how large her belly had actually been when she lost it. In my mind, it seemed quite large. For the next couple of days, I stayed home and focused on working in my yard and around the house. It felt therapeutic. On the 3rd day, I called her parents. "How is she doing?" I asked. "She's doing wonderfully. She's back to her old self. She asked if we've heard from you." "Maybe I'll give her a call." I had her number from when she had reached out to me. "She returned to work today and won't be off until 3. Is she still living with you?" "No, she went home yesterday." "That's great for her." At 4 o'clock, I called her. "Hello. Hi, it's Michael." I could almost hear her catch her breath. "Hi. I was just checking in to see how you were." "I'm doing well, Michael, thank you. Listen, if you haven't eaten yet, would you like to go for a bite at Enrique's?" There was silence on the line. "Hello? Oh, I'm sorry, Michael. You surprised me. I understand. Maybe another time then." No, I'd love to go." I found myself replaying in my mind why I decided to ask her to dinner, but I couldn't pinpoint it. We ended up sharing some laughs and reminiscing about old friends and good times during the evening. When I dropped her off, I walked her to the door. "Would you like some coffee?" I nearly said yes, but managed to decline, saying I had a long day and needed to sleep. We hugged each other goodnight. My kids had been away long enough, and I wanted them back home. After speaking with them and their grandfather several times, I sensed they weren't quite ready to return, and he wasn't eager to let them go. I couldn't help but chuckle. I spoke to Ruth and expressed my desire for them to come home. "Dad, we can't come home just yet," she replied. "Big Jake is taking us on a Disney cruise, and we can't miss that." "He's doing what? I need to talk to him." Jake got on the line. "Yes, Michael?" "What's this about a Disney cruise?" "It's a weekly cruise. The kids are going to love it." "Shouldn't we have discussed this first?" "Nah. I'm their grandfather. I can pretty much do whatever I want with them. It's in the grandparent handbook. But they will need their passports. Can you overnight them to me? Don't the parents get a say in this?" "Nope. Not when it comes to grandparent-grandchild relationships. Parents become irrelevant." I laughed. "All right, Jake, but if anything happens to them—" He chuckled. "Don't worry, Michael. I've got it all covered. Enjoy another week to yourself." "Maybe I'd rather have my kids back." "Tough luck. You lose this one." We both laughed, and I sent their passports overnight. If they had been home, I might have had fewer reasons to call Lisa. As it was, I managed to hold off for 2 more days. "Hi, Michael." "Hi. I was wondering if you'd like to go to OKC on Friday. The symphony is performing." It was Lisa who first introduced me to classical music, but the program featured all Beatles music. I just didn't mention that. I should have known better because she was already aware. "You do know they're doing a tribute to the Beatles, right?" she said with a laugh. "That's fine. We don't have to go." "No, I'd love to go." We frequently visited the symphony in OKC and would spend the night each time. However, I had no plans to stay overnight with her this time. On Friday morning, Lisa called me. "I can't join you tonight," she said. I was tempted to ask why, but I held back, hoping she might offer an explanation. She didn't. "But I appreciate the invitation. It means a lot." "Perhaps another time," I replied. "I hope so." So, perhaps she was beginning to accept my presence and forgive her past. Maybe she was finally starting to forgive herself and returning to the life she had before I re-entered it. Lisa and I didn't communicate at all for the next 2 weeks. Eventually, my kids were coming home. I drove to OKC to meet them. Big Jake had flown in with them. I tried to convince him to stay with us for a few days, but he preferred to return home. There were some emotional farewells. He and the girls were crying, while little Jake stood there, embarrassed by the public display of affection from his sisters and grandfather. They talked nonstop the entire way home, and I ended up learning more about Disney World and Disney cruises than I ever wanted to know. 2 days later, the 4 of us were out grocery shopping. Food runs out fast when you've got 3 hungry kids. I sent Ruth and Carrie to grab some bananas, but they came back a few minutes later without them, and with Lisa. "Dad," Ruth said, "look who I found." She was getting bananas, too. Ruth remembered Lisa from her brief time in the hospital. "Hello," I greeted her. "Hi. Are you doing okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine." "Good." An awkward silence followed. "Well, we should keep moving. Come on, kids." "Sure," she replied. "Maybe I'll see you around." I watched her walk away, and a part of me wanted to follow and ask what had happened to us. But then I realized there wasn't really an us. It had just been me trying to help an old friend, who also happened to be my ex-wife. Still, I missed the little time we had spent together, and I wasn't sure if I missed Lisa, missed my kids, or missed having a woman in my life and everything that came with it. My brother Matt is married to Rosa. Rosa has a cousin named Francesca. Apparently, Francesca and I had met years ago, though I didn't remember it. One night, Matt and Rosa invited me over for dinner, and Francesca was there. The evening was pleasant. Francesca was attractive and charming, but there wasn't anything that sparked my interest for more. After that, I made it clear to Matt and Rosa that their matchmaking efforts for me were done. Not because I didn't want to be with someone. I did. One Saturday afternoon, while my kids were at the pool with their cousins, I went to the park and sat by the lake. It was something I used to do often when I was younger. It was my own fortress of solitude. Even in a crowded park, I could always find peace and feel completely alone. Sitting there, I reflected on my life, my marriage to Lisa, meeting Connie and falling in love with her, getting married again, her passing, my Army career, and my 3 amazing children. I realized how lucky I was. I had loved 2 women deeply and passionately, and I understood that was the only way I knew how to love. I reached a point where it no longer mattered that Lisa had cheated on me. If we hadn't divorced, I never would have met Connie or had my children. The reason for our divorce didn't seem important anymore. I stood up, ready to go back to my kids, and as I turned, I nearly walked right into Lisa. "I've been watching you for over an hour. You haven't moved at all," she said. "I've been thinking," I replied. "I figured. You used to come here a lot when you were trying to sort things out." "Yeah, I did. You and I used to come here too and park right over there." She pointed to a spot I remembered well. "I remember. That's where we had our first kiss," I said with a smile. We went to the picnic table and sat down. "It's been a long 2 weeks," she said. "I missed you." "Yeah, me too. Do you know why I couldn't go to the symphony orchestra concert with you?" I decided it was none of my business. "It really concerns you." She hesitated. When we left, we stayed overnight. We booked a hotel room, brought wine and cheese. In good weather, depending on which floor our room was on, we turned off all the lights, sat on the balcony, sipped wine, and nibbled cheese. Then we would go into the house and make love. I remember. That's why I couldn't go. The thought of sitting next to you, listening to music, and knowing that after the concert we would come back here by car instead of going to the hotel was unbearable. We sat in silence for a long time before I finally spoke. "I understand, but what's been going on for the last couple of weeks?" "Honestly?" "Yes. I don't trust myself around you. You just mentioned that I almost hurt you right there when we first got intimate. The truth is, it's hard for me not to touch you when I'm around." We exchanged glances before turning away. Then she spoke again. "I realize that you will never love me again and will not want to make love to me. That's why I kept my distance. I come here, just like you, to reflect. I've seen you sitting here trying to figure it all out, and I've just been watching. I'd like to know what's going on in your head. I would like to believe that if we spent enough time together, maybe you could learn to love me again, But since we are going to live in the same city, I would prefer that we at least pretend that we are friends." "I like to think we're friends," I said. "Me too." There was a long, meaningless pause. "Well, I have to go. I came here to clear my head, but if I stay, I'll only think about you." She went to her car. I caught up with her and walked beside her. At some point, we joined hands. At her car, I held the door open as she began to get in. "Lisa," I called out, making her pause and look at me. "How many men have you dated since your last divorce?" She looked me in the eye. 3. "Did you sleep with any of them?" "One of them. Twice." She got into her car and drove away. I stood there watching her leave, unsure why I had even asked that. It wasn't my business and had nothing to do with anything. Then I drove home. The next Saturday came around. My kids were, once again, swimming with their cousins. I was at the intersection of 14th and Grand when someone ran a red light and slammed into my car. I woke up in the hospital with my left arm in a sling. When I looked around, I saw my mom, brother, and sister standing by my bedside. My mom leaned down, kissed my cheek, and held my hand. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Like I got hit by a truck." My brother chuckled. "Actually, you did. A truck, with a drugged-up driver. He's behind bars now." My mom spoke up again. "The doctor says you'll be okay. You're bruised and battered, and your shoulder is sprained, but all things considered, it could have been much worse." My kids came to see me later. The girls were in tears, while Jake was intrigued by all the tubes and wires. The girls held my hands, but Jake was curious about the bag of urine hanging from my bed. I tried to explain what a catheter was, though he didn't quite get it. Ruth, being the oldest, understood and wrinkled her nose, making funny noises while I explained it to him. It was late in the evening, and I managed to convince everyone to leave because I wanted some time alone. I was tired of having company. Dinner that night was a cheeseburger and fries, both cold by the time they made it to my room. I was hungry, so I ate everything despite it being cold. They had given me enough painkillers that I was genuinely feeling no pain. I was watching TV when I saw my door slowly begin to open. I watched as she entered and stood beside my bed. "How are you feeling?" "Could be worse." "Can you get out of bed?" "I haven't tried. I don't think they want me to." "Good," she said, then leaned over and kissed me. A long, slow kiss that touched the depths of my soul, letting me know she truly meant it. "I've wanted to do that since I saw you in here with Ruth. Now you can report me to the administration if you want, but I did it, and I'm glad. After seeing you at the lake, I decided that I still love you, and if I'm headed for heartbreak, so be it." Then she left. I stayed awake until after 2 in the morning, trying to make sense of the kiss and what she said. I pressed the control button on my combined TV, nurse call, and bed adjustment device, lowering the top half of my bed until it was flat. I knew I enjoyed the kiss, but I couldn't tell if it was because it was her, or if I was just so desperate that any kiss would have felt the same. Eventually, I drifted off. When I woke up at 7, my mother was there. We went through the usual "how are you" routine before she sat on the edge of my bed, took my right hand, held it, and started rubbing it. Then she asked, "What's going on between you and Lisa?" "What do you mean?" I asked, letting go of her hand and reaching for the button to raise the top half of my bed so I could sit up. When I arrived, she was asleep in that chair with a blanket over her. Was she here all night? I don't know. I fell asleep after 2 and she wasn't here then. Well, she woke up a few minutes after I came in, said good morning, folded the blanket, and told me she was going to check on your breakfast. She left about 15 minutes ago." At that moment, the door opened, and Lisa came in with my breakfast tray. She placed it on the small table and adjusted it so it was right in front of me. They had scrambled eggs, but I told them you liked them over medium, so they changed it. "Is that still how you like them?" She lifted the cover off the plate, revealing 2 perfectly cooked eggs. "I also mentioned you prefer ham over turkey sausage or bacon." She smiled at me. She placed a napkin on my chest and began cutting up my ham and eggs. Then, she picked up a piece of both with my fork and brought it to my mouth, as if she was going to feed me. "What are you doing? I'm not helpless." "You pretty much are. Your left arm's in a sling and you're left-handed. You can't feed yourself because you've never been good at using your right hand for anything useful, so just open up like a good boy." I opened my mouth while my mom chuckled. I remembered the cold burger and fries from the night before, and didn't recall having any trouble eating them, but I chose not to mention it. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter. Would you like to take over?" Still laughing, my mom replied, "No, dear, you're doing fine. I did my part when he was a baby." "He's still a baby," Lisa teased, wiping my mouth with the napkin. I ate everything on the tray, unable to take my eyes off her. At least she let me drink my coffee by myself. Once I finished, she wiped my mouth again and kissed me. Once more. After she left, my mom said, "Michael, you've got a woman who's in love with you. What are you going to do about it?" "I have no idea," I said, staring at the closed door. I stayed in the hospital for 2 more days, and I found out she never left. She spent her nights sleeping in the chair beside my bed. If anything concerned me, she wouldn't let anyone else handle it. The only other person allowed to feed me was Ruth, who thought it was cool. So did Carrie. Jake found it hilarious. On the morning of my release, she was there to help me to the entrance, where my brother was waiting to take me home. "Call me if you need anything," she said, leaning down to kiss me once more. I thought to myself that this was becoming a habit as Matt drove me away. I glanced at him, and he wore a smirk on his face. "Not a word," I warned him. "Not a single word." He remained silent, but the smirk lingered. That first night at home, I decided to call her. "I was hoping you'd reach out," she responded. "I appreciate all your help at the hospital. Would you be willing to come over and assist Ruth and Carrie with dinner? They want to help, but could use some guidance." She arrived within 20 minutes, and I could hear her laughter with the girls as they prepared the meal. Jake usually avoids the kitchen, only venturing in for snacks, but it wasn't long before I heard him laughing along with them. She stayed to eat at the urging of my kids. After dinner, for the first time I could remember, the girls volunteered to clean up. Lisa came into the living room to chat while they tidied up. Jake had no plans to assist his sisters. Once the cleanup was finished, the 3 children went to their rooms, saying goodnight and giving us hugs. Even little Jake hugged Lisa. Lisa and I were having a conversation while the kids took their showers and got ready for bed. As we continued talking, it was nearly midnight, and I began to show signs of fatigue. "Feeling sleepy?" she asked. "A little," I replied. "If you need help with your shower, I'm here for you," she said with a smile. Not in the shower, silly. I can wrap your sling so it doesn't get wet." "I don't need the sling. I'm not helpless," I insisted. "All right," she said. "I'll head home then." She stood up, picked up her purse, walked over, and kissed me goodnight. I had developed a habit of staying awake and thinking, and that night was no different. One thought that kept nagging at me was that something about Lisa felt off. It took me 2 days to realize what it was. She didn't smell like I remembered. In fact, she only had the scent of soap, very pleasant soap, but soap nonetheless. There was no hint of perfume. That was it. No taboo. Over the next couple of weeks, Lisa came to my house at least 4 times a week. The kids got accustomed to her cooking dinner and joining us at the table, and I enjoyed it too. I received notice that I had secured a permanent teaching position and that school would be starting soon. I had completely overlooked the need for clothes and supplies for the kids. We managed to get their supplies sorted out, but when it came to clothing, even Jake didn't want me to shop with him. One morning, while we were discussing it at home, Ruth said, "Lisa knows more than you do, Dad. She can help us. Maybe she's not available. Just call her." I put the phone on speaker. When her phone rang, she answered, "Hi, Michael. Hi, I'm facing a mutiny here." "A mutiny?" "Yeah, it's time to buy school clothes, and my 3 little troublemakers don't trust my choices." There was a chorus of agreement from them. Lisa laughed. "That's because you shouldn't be picking out girls' clothes." Ruth and Carrie cheered in agreement. "Mine too," chimed in Jake. "So they want you to come with us." There was silence, followed by a sniffle. "Really?" she asked. "Really. If you can't make it, they'll just have to put up with me." "No, I'll make the time. When?" "Now," came their enthusiastic response. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Yes, I did. I could almost sense her smile. We picked her up and went shopping, which lasted until late in the day. I had never seen my kids enjoy themselves more. When we got home, we ordered pizza for dinner. The kids began trying on their new purchases, and we had a lively celebration. As it started getting late, I asked Lisa if she was ready to leave. She glanced around the room. The kids were still playing and finishing off the leftover pizza. "Not really, but I suppose I should." "All right, kids. I'm taking Lisa home. Get your showers and hop into bed. You should all be asleep by the time I return." We drove to her house in silence. I walked her to the door, and for the first time in many years, I leaned in for a kiss. "Thank you for today," I said. "Any time," she replied, touching my arm and smiling before going inside. After a brief moment, I rang her doorbell. She opened the door right away, as if she had been expecting me. "Can I ask you something?" I inquired. "Of course. Why don't you wear taboo anymore?" Her gaze met mine, and tears filled her eyes. She took my hand and said, "Come with me." Leading me to her bedroom, she released my hand and went to her chest of drawers. She opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a box, placing it on the bed before opening it. Inside were our wedding album, her rings, our marriage license, and a collection of letters. The last item was a half-full bottle of taboo. "I sealed this bottle the day I requested the divorce. It was your perfume, and it's one you bought for me. I haven't worn it or any other fragrance since." She put the bottle back in the box and returned it to the drawer. "I will wear it again when you ask me to." I took her by the hand and led her to the front door. As soon as we arrived, I opened it and turned to face her, holding both her hands in mine. "There's a concert at OKC on Friday night. I'd like you to come with me and put this on." Her eyes widened and she began to cry. I couldn't remember ever seeing her cry so much. It's amazing how many tears she had. Unable to stop myself, I returned to the house, closed the door, and hugged her. It took her a while to calm down. When she finally calmed down, she reached into my right back pocket of my trousers and pulled out a handkerchief that I always kept there. She stood there, wiping her eyes. "Really? What is it?" she asked. "Seriously." "Are you serious?" "I'm not kidding." "Should I take a travel bag with me?" she asked in a tone as if she was begging me to agree. I smiled. "Just your toothbrush. You won't need any clothes." She suddenly rushed at me, pinning me against her front door. I picked her up on Friday afternoon. She looked amazing, and there was a taboo on her. The trip was quiet. As for the symphony, I can't say much about it, because I was too focused on Lisa, who was staring at me intently. About 20 minutes into the performance, she leaned over to me and whispered, "You know, we don't have to listen to it all." I replied quietly, "I know, but the anticipation makes it even more exciting. I'm tired of waiting. I want to make love to you." "Shh," said a voice from the row behind us. "Clear the room," someone ahead of us said. "Good idea," I replied, getting up, taking her hand, and heading for the exit. 30 minutes later, we were in our room. I was trembling. She was trembling. The whole room seemed to be vibrating. I went up to her and hugged her. "Would you like some champagne?" I asked her gently in her ear. Number. All I want is you. It was an amazing night. I felt at home. I woke up when she snuggled up to me and couldn't help but smile. On the way home, we felt like the good old days. We were young lovers again. I gave her a ride home, but before we left, we made love. A few days later, Lisa came over for dinner. I had prepared steaks and shrimp to grill. As soon as Lisa entered the house, the kids rushed to greet her with hugs. When Ruth reached her, she paused and said, "You smell like my mom." "What?" Lisa replied. "You smell like my mom. She used to wear the same perfume." Lisa shot me a look with narrowed eyes. Instead of being a fun evening, the atmosphere became tense. The kids were oblivious, but I could feel it. Every time I glanced at Lisa, she seemed to be firing back at me with her gaze. Finally, dinner came to an end. "I have to go," Lisa announced. "I'll walk you to your car," I offered. I attempted to hold her hand as we walked to her car, but she pulled away. I opened the car door for her, and she turned to face me. "I thought it was me you wanted, but it was her all along. You didn't want me. You wanted her back. That's why you asked me about the perfume. You were just trying to revive a piece of her." "That's not true. No, I love that perfume, but you had it first. If anything, I might have been drawn to her because of you." With that, she got into her car and drove away. A whole month passed without a word from her. She blocked my number, and whenever I went to her house to talk, she wouldn't answer the door. The one time I spotted her at the mall, she avoided me completely. The kids couldn't comprehend the situation, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't explain it to them. One Saturday evening, the kids and I decided to go to the movies. It was one of those girly films that Ruth and Carrie were eager to see, but Jake and I were not looking forward to it at all. The movie hadn't begun yet, and the house lights were still on. "Isn't that Lisa?" Carrie asked. I glanced over and saw her walking down the aisle to her seat, accompanied by a man who took the seat next to her. "Yes, it is," I replied. "Can we go say hello?" she inquired. "I don't think that would be a good idea, sweetie." As the lights dimmed and the movie started, I occasionally looked in Lisa's direction whenever the screen lit up brightly. I noticed them sharing a drink, taking turns sipping from the same straw. When the film concluded, we exited the theater. The girls were animatedly chatting, while Jake was pretending to gag by pointing at his mouth and making retching noises. In the lobby, Lisa and her date spotted us. She approached to greet the kids, but didn't introduce her date or acknowledge me. As they walked away, I overheard him asking who we were. "That's my ex and his family," she replied. Life continued. With Christmas break just beginning, I was in the midst of finishing my holiday shopping. I had already taken care of gifts for my mom, my brother and his family, as well as my sister and hers. I wanted to do a bit more for my own kids, so I was strolling around the mall. I found myself in the only men's store at the mall. While there were several stores for women, there was just one for men. I was browsing the suits because my old ones were starting to look worn. The sales clerk accompanied me as I looked around. I didn't require her assistance, but I didn't stop her from following me. After I had seen everything I wanted, I thanked her and began to leave. Lisa was standing by the large open door as I exited. I considered walking around her, but she spoke up. "Did you find something you like? Why do you care?" I continued walking. She was close enough for me to tell she wasn't wearing taboo. "Would you like to have a conversation?" she asked. "I don't think we have anything to talk about," I replied, still walking. "You made your point when you accused me of not wanting you, but wanting Connie back. If you want to talk, you can speak to your boyfriend." "He's just a friend." "A good friend, it seems. Good enough to share a straw with." She was a few steps behind me, but quickly caught up and grabbed my arm. "What are you talking about?" I pulled away and continued walking. "I saw you drinking with the same star in the movies." He took his glass and we drank according to mine. "What's wrong with that?" "Casual friends don't do that. This is what close friends or lovers would do." He stopped, but I continued. "What are you talking about?" "You heard everything I said. You're smart. You know English." I kept walking and she tried to keep up. "You're accusing me of—" I stopped and turned to face her. "Are you sleeping with him?" "What? Do you have hearing problems?" "What gives you the right to ask me that?" When I questioned her at the lake about how many men she had dated since her divorce and whether she had slept with them, she answered without hesitation, but now she was on the defensive. "I don't have the right, but I thought we were getting to a point where—" Forget it. I need to go." I turned to leave. She grabbed my arm, stopping me. "I'll sleep with whoever I choose. Do you get that? You don't own me and you never have." "You're right, I never did. You've always slept with whoever you wanted. Even marriage didn't stop you." I gently removed her hand from my arm and went home. The kids and I had a lovely Christmas. Matt and Rosa were invited to a neighborhood New Year's Eve party. They asked me to come along, and, in a surprising turn of events for me, I agreed. We hadn't been there long when Lisa arrived with the man I recognized from the movie. I told Matt I was leaving and explained why. "Come on, Michael. Are you going to run away every time you see her with someone else? Grow a pair and get back in the game." That was the best advice I ever received, and I decided to follow it. I grabbed a beer and began mingling. Eventually, I found myself in a small group when Lisa joined us, apparently familiar with most of them. They were unaware of our past, and we made no effort to reveal that we knew each other. "How's Timmy?" someone inquired. "He's fine," Lisa replied. "He's over there getting a drink." "Is he a keeper?" one of the women asked. I hadn't directly looked at her, but I felt her gaze on me, so I met her eyes. We locked gazes as she responded, "Probably. For someone." She then excused herself and walked away. "They seem like a nice couple," someone in the group remarked. "Yeah, but something feels off. Timmy seems a bit frustrated. He likes her, but she has some issues, and he's unsure if it's worth waiting for her. He says she treats him like a brother." "Issues? Like what?" "For instance, he's never been to her house. They've been dating for a while, and he still hasn't set foot inside." "Yeah, but I bet she's been to his place plenty of times," one of the guys chimed in, causing the men to laugh while the women remained silent. "You jerk," one of the women scolded, giving him a light punch on the arm. "You're all the same. Didn't you catch what she just said? She mentioned he might be a keeper for someone else. That means she's not interested in a serious relationship with him and probably has feelings for someone else. So they aren't sleeping together. Oh man, unrequited love is the worst. I really feel for him, someone else commented. That doesn't mean he isn't hooking up with her, another person added. She's not with anyone. She's been my friend for years and we work together at the hospital. Sometimes she has these crying episodes and none of us knows why. Personally, I think it's because of her terrible ex-husband. She still loves him and he probably treats her poorly. How do you know that? I asked. I can't say for sure, but I know she keeps his picture in her work locker. Oh my God, it's you. You're her ex. A general commotion filled the air as they chatted among themselves and cast furtive glances in my direction. I decided to leave them and walk towards my car. On my way out, I passed by Matt. I'm leaving, I informed him. Lisa and Timmy were standing by the kitchen counter with another couple. Our eyes locked as I walked by. Just as I was almost at my car, I turned back and approached them. Lisa was just wiping her eyes. Excuse me, but I need to talk to you, I said to Lisa. Why, so you can accuse me of sleeping with every man in town? I just want to ask you a question. I paused. Please? Excuse me, Timmy. I'll be right back. We stepped out onto the sidewalk. This is far enough. What's your question? Actually, I have a couple. First, do you have my picture in your locker at work? She glanced back at the house. Well? Yes, she replied, turning away from me. Why? There was a lengthy pause. It's important, Lisa. Please tell me. She turned to look at me. Because I love you. Then why haven't you said anything? Because you're an asshole. All right, I'm an asshole. But I'm an asshole who loves you. Her eyes widened for a moment before narrowing. I'm not sure I believe you. It's the truth. You accused me of being with Timmy. I'm beyond caring now. I cheated on you and another man got me pregnant. That was a long time ago. Once you forgive me, you can't ever bring it up again. I've already forgiven you. Right there on the street, she lunged at me as she had done at her house. We embraced and kissed. 2 cars passed by, honking their horns. She placed her hands on either side of my face. The last man I was with besides you was the one I mentioned at the lake. He was one of the 3 guys I dated after my divorce. Timmy and I are just friends. He wants more, but I can't and never could. We headed back to the party where Timmy was waiting in the doorway. As we approached him, she said, I'm sorry, Timmy. I understand, he replied, glancing at me. I guess you'll be taking her home, so there's no need for me to stick around. He then walked away. The atmosphere at the party shifted when Lisa and I entered hand in hand, drawing plenty of whispers and stares. When Matt spotted us, he burst out laughing. We lingered for about another 30 minutes. At midnight, we found ourselves in her bed, enjoying each other's company. Lisa became a near-constant presence in my home, but she never spent the night, nor did I at hers, except on weekends when the kids stayed at their cousin's place. Depending on her work schedule, Lisa often helped the girls with dinner, and usually remained until midnight on those nights. One Saturday morning after her night shift, I picked her up from work and brought her to my house. The girls had breakfast ready for us, and after we all ate, Lisa and I washed the dishes together. She stayed up for a couple more hours, but I could see how tired she was, so I led her to my room and suggested she take a few hours of rest. I closed the door and turned to head back to the living room, where I found Ruth standing. Do you love Lisa? She inquired. What's it to you, you little snoop? Just answer my question, Dad. All right. Yes, I do. More than Mom? Oh, goodness no, sweetheart. It's a different kind of love. Different how? Let me see if I can explain it. I paused, took a deep breath, held her hand, and we walked down the hall to the living room as I spoke. Do you love your brother? Of course. What about your sister? Don't be ridiculous, Dad. Of course I do. And me? How about your grandfather? What's your point, Dad? My point is that we can love many different people, and that love comes in various forms. It doesn't mean we love one person more than another. It just means our love for them is different. Do you get it? I think so. Being a grown-up is going to be a drag, isn't it? Only if you let it be. I chuckled. Lisa slept until early afternoon and then spent the rest of the day with us. Later that evening, I took her to the hospital so she could retrieve her car and head home. The following morning, I overheard Ruth and Carrie talking before breakfast, but I couldn't catch what they were saying. As always, Jake was only focused on food. Ruth and Carrie eventually joined us for breakfast, and Carrie spoke up first. Are you going to marry Lisa? Again? She asked. I'd like to, but a lot of it depends on the three of you. Why us? Ruth inquired. Well, if I propose and she says yes, it means she'd move in here and live with us. Would you sleep in the same bed? Carrie asked. Of course they would, silly. Married people always sleep together unless they're angry with each other, Ruth explained. And how do you know that? I asked, surprised. Dad, she said, as if I was the most clueless person. How many kids at my school do you think live with both their birth parents? I shrugged. Less than half. Don't they teach you that in college? I must have missed that lesson, I mumbled. Little Jake chimed in. If you marry her and she moves in, does that mean she'll cook for us all the time? Some of the time, I told him, but we'd still have to help out. She'd be a wife and stepmother, not a maid or servant. I'm okay with that, he said. Ruth and Carrie quickly agreed. The kids and I spent a whole week picking out the perfect ring. I had considered using her old rings from the box in her room, but ultimately decided that this moment deserved something new. A fresh start with a new ring. The day we bought it, Ruth called her and invited her over. When she arrived, the three kids rushed out to the driveway, practically pulling her out of the car and into the house. They led her to the middle of the living room and said, "Stand right here and don't move." Then they just stood there, waiting for me. What's going on? Lisa asked, confused. Dad wants to ask you something, little Jake said, nearly bursting with laughter as his sisters tried to quiet him. I was in my room trying to steady my nerves. I had no doubts about wanting to marry her, but something she once said was on my mind. Once you forgive me, you can't bring it up again or throw it in my face. She was right. My parents had always taught me that once you give someone a gift, you can't take it back, and it's no longer your business what they do with it. The same goes for forgiveness. Once you truly forgive someone, no matter what they did, you can't undo it or keep reminding them of it. You have to be certain you're ready to forgive. As little Jake once put it, I'm good with that. I finally walked into the living room where she stood, looking at my three little troublemakers, unsure of what was happening. Or maybe she had some idea. But it turned out she didn't, because the moment I got down on one knee, she fainted. I never really got to ask her, because as soon as she came to, she started saying yes, yes, yes. The wedding took place 5 months later. Her father gave her away for the third time, and it was the second time he handed her to me. I don't want to do this again, he said at the altar. You won't have to, I assured him. "This is forever." I smiled at her and breathed in the familiar scent of her nearly 20-year-old taboo perfume.